My name is Rowan Keller, and I was born in a small Alaskan town that never appeared on most maps. It clung to the edge of a bay, where the mountains dipped down into the sea, ringed by spruce forests, so thick you could vanish within 20 paces. Life there was measured less by clocks and more by the tide, by the hiss of snowstorms, by the sound of things moving in the dark when you thought the wilderness should be still. Growing up in that place meant accepting certain truths, that winters were long, that neighbors were few, and that survival required obedience to rules older than memory. There were 5 rules that defined the town, written not in books, but spoken from parent to child, reinforced by looks exchanged over dinner tables and warnings whispered before sleep. I learned them as naturally as I learned my own name, and I lived beneath their weight for as long as I can remember. The first rule was never go into the forest alone. The second was do not whistle after sunset. The third was keep your doors locked, even if you were home. The fourth was never answer when someone calls your name from the trees. And the fifth, the one none of us spoke of without unease, was that if you ever saw a second moon rise over the bay, you must hide and not come out until dawn. These rules were not explained to us. They were handed down as fact, and it was considered foolish, even dangerous, to question them. In a place where every mistake could cost your life, whether to frostbite or thin ice or something older, children learned early that trust in the rules meant survival. I was 8 when I first asked my father about them. He was a broad-shouldered man with a face weathered by salt air and cold wind. His beard often rimmed in frost even inside the cabin. He did not scare easily, which made his silence more frightening than any words might have been. I remember sitting at the rough wooden table in our kitchen, the oil lamp flickering as the storm rattled the shutters. I asked why we could not whistle at night, why the sound of a tune could matter when the wind itself howled through the trees. My father's eyes shifted to the window, though the curtains were drawn. After a long pause, he said, "Because it whistles back, and it doesn't stop." Then he set down his cup of coffee, ended the conversation, and left me staring at the lamplight trembling on the walls. Our town was small enough that I knew every face, every voice. There were perhaps 60 of us, a collection of families bound by blood, necessity, and the weight of isolation. The nearest road ended 40 miles south, cut off by snowdrifts most of the year. Supply planes came when the weather allowed, but often weeks passed without any sign of the outside world. We learned to hunt, to fish, to mend what broke with whatever scraps were available. The rules bound us together, even as they set us apart from every place else. I grew up surrounded by silence deeper than any city could understand. Silence broken sometimes by sounds that carried too far through the trees. Sounds you learn not to name. My earliest memory of fear came one autumn evening when I was 9. The sky was streaked with purple and gold, the air sharp with the scent of dying leaves. I was walking home from my friend Isaac's house, following the narrow trail along the edge of the bay. The water reflected the fading light, rippling like molten glass. I was humming without thinking, some nonsense tune picked up from Isaac's younger sister, when I caught myself and stopped cold. The sun had dipped below the horizon minutes earlier. My breath froze in front of me. I had been whistling after dark. The silence that followed was unbearable. I swear the trees grew closer in that moment, their shadows thickening. Then, from somewhere behind me, the exact notes I had just whistled drifted back, soft and deliberate, as though the forest itself had learned my song. I ran until my lungs burned, not daring to look behind me. When I burst through the cabin door, my father locked it without a word. But the look he gave me was worse than any scolding. He knew what I had heard, and he knew it had heard me. The years that followed deepened my understanding of the rules, though no one ever explained them directly. It was in the stories shared at the edges of gatherings, in the sudden silences that fell when questions were asked. I overheard enough to piece together fragments. A man who went into the forest alone one winter and never came back, though his axe was found upright in the snow. A woman who answered a voice calling her name from the tree line and returned home with eyes that no longer recognized her children. A fisherman who left his door unlocked one night, his body discovered by morning with the expression of someone who had seen something so vast, so incomprehensible, that fear was etched into his bones. Each rule had its proof, scattered across the whispered history of our people, and though some doubted, no one dared break them twice. I grew older, restless like any teenager trapped at the end of the world. By the time I was 15, I wanted more than the bay, more than the mountains that penned us in. I wanted roads, light, music that wasn't filtered through static on a battery radio. Isaac and I would sit on the cliffs and talk about leaving, about what lay beyond the forests and storms. Yet even as I dreamed, I could not shake the pull of the rules. They had been carved into me like the grain of wood. Sometimes, when the night was still, I would imagine testing them. Whistling, answering, walking into the trees. But something always stopped me, something like an invisible hand on my shoulder, a warning that curiosity here was more lethal than hunger or cold. The fifth rule remained the most mysterious. I had never seen a second moon, though I often stared at the sky in secret, half hoping, half terrified that I might. The adults spoke of it less than the others, but when it was mentioned, faces tightened, eyes dropped. Once, on a rare summer night when the sun lingered almost until morning, my mother whispered to my father that she prayed the sky would stay clear. He hushed her, but his grip on her wrist betrayed his fear. It was enough to plant the seed in me, the understanding that there were things above us as dangerous as those below. By 17, I had begun keeping a journal, though paper was scarce. I wrote what I remembered, what I suspected. I wrote about the way tracks sometimes appeared on the snow that did not match any animal we knew, long strides that vanished into frozen air. I wrote about the voices that carried across the bay when the fog was thick, voices speaking words that sounded familiar yet twisted, as if hearing my own language through broken glass. I wrote about the night Isaac swore he saw a figure standing in the surf, motionless as the tide swallowed its legs. We went down to look in the morning, but the only thing left was a single line of wet footprints that ended abruptly at the tree line. The rules kept us alive, but they also trapped us. I knew that even as I obeyed them, even as I grew into a man shaped by their shadow, there was a part of me that wanted to rebel, that wanted to know whether the threats were real or the invention of frightened ancestors. But every time I stood at the edge of breaking one, the memory of that whistle coming back to me stopped my breath. Something was out there. Something that did not just watch us but learned from us, imitated us. Something that wanted us to forget the rules. I realize now, looking back, that the town's silence was not born of ignorance but of survival. We did not speak of what we saw, because naming it gave it weight, made it stronger. The rules were our only defense, and even those were fragile. It was inevitable that someone would break them. It was inevitable that I would learn what lay behind them. That realization would not come until the winter I turned 18, when the second moon finally rose over the bay. But the path to that night began much earlier, with small cracks in the silence, small temptations that led me closer and closer to the edge. Even now, I can hear the echo of my own whistle drifting back through the years, reminding me that the forest never forgot me and never will. The winter of my 18th year came down hard and early. By October, the bay was already freezing over, the ice crusting white against the shoreline, and the sky hung low and gray like a lid pressing down on us. I had grown used to the weight of winters, but that season felt different, sharper somehow, like every shadow cut deeper, every silence lingered longer. People in town seemed restless. Arguments broke out over nothing. The old men who normally laughed at the trading post spoke in low, clipped tones. Isaac told me he'd caught his father staring at the sky for hours, muttering under his breath. The air felt charged, as though the rules themselves were waiting to be broken. It was Isaac who first pushed me toward testing them. We were walking along the cliff ridge one afternoon, bundled against the cold, our boots crunching in the snow. The sun was setting, the light bleeding red across the ice. He turned to me suddenly, eyes bright against the pale of his skin, and said, "What if it's all just stories, Rowan? What if they made it up so we wouldn't wander off or get into trouble?" His words hung there, dangerous and enticing. I wanted to tell him he was wrong, to remind him of what I had heard that night when I was 9, but my mouth stayed closed. I realized, with a sort of dread, that I didn't want to prove him wrong. I wanted to know if he was right. The chance came 2 nights later. Isaac arrived at my cabin after supper, his cheeks flushed from the cold, his voice carrying a reckless edge. "Let's go into the forest," he whispered, glancing over his shoulder though no one was there. "Just for an hour. We won't go far." My first instinct was to refuse, to remind him of the first rule, but he pressed on. "We'll be together. That's not alone. The rules won't care." He laughed, though it sounded more like nerves than humor. "Against every instinct drilled into me since childhood," I agreed. We told our parents we were checking the traps near the ridge, and once their backs were turned, we slipped into the tree line with only lanterns and our coats. The forest swallowed us whole. The snow muffled our steps, and the lanterns threw long shadows across the trunks. My breath fogged in the air, drifting upward like smoke. I felt exposed, as though the very act of walking there was a confession, an invitation for something to notice us. Isaac, bold as always, hummed under his breath. I nearly slapped him. "Don't," I hissed. "Not after dark." He smirked but fell silent, though I could see the defiance in his posture. We walked for what felt like forever, though in truth it was probably less than half an hour. The deeper we went, the stranger the forest felt. The trees seemed closer together, the paths unfamiliar, though I knew these woods as well as my own heartbeat. The lantern light caught on ice that shimmered like eyes, and I couldn't shake the feeling we were being followed. We stopped in a small clearing, the snow untouched, the silence absolute. Isaac grinned at me, breath puffing from his mouth like smoke signals. "See, nothing, just trees." He lifted his lantern high, casting the light farther into the woods. For a moment I believed him. For a moment I thought, maybe all the rules were just cages built out of fear. Then something moved at the edge of the clearing. At first I thought it was a trick of the light. Branches swaying, shadows shifting. But it stepped forward, and I saw legs. Human legs, pale against the dark. The figure stopped just beyond the glow of our lanterns, and though I couldn't see its face, I knew it was watching us. My throat closed. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs locked in place. Isaac whispered, "Who's there?" His voice cracked. The figure didn't answer. Instead, it tilted its head in a way that was both curious and unnatural, like a bird mimicking a human gesture. Then it called my name. Not in a stranger's voice, but in my mother's. The exact pitch, the exact softness she used when waking me as a child. "Rowan," it said, and the sound cut through me like a blade. I wanted to run, but my body betrayed me. One step forward, then another. The rules roared in my head. Never answer when someone calls your name from the trees. Isaac grabbed my arm, pulling me back. Don't, he hissed, his eyes wide with terror. The figure stepped closer, just enough for the light to brush its face. It was me, my own face staring back. Pale and hollow-eyed, the smile stretched too wide. My reflection in the snow come to life. I think I screamed. Isaac yanked me backward, and we both bolted, crashing through the trees, branches tearing at our coats. The forest howled behind us. Not voices, not footsteps, but something like both, chasing us all the way to the cabin lights. We slammed the door shut, panting, our hearts hammering. My father's face when he saw us said everything. He knew what we had done. He locked the door, drew the curtains, and didn't speak a word. That night I lay awake listening. Outside, something walked past our cabin, slow and deliberate. It whistled my tune. After that night, Isaac and I barely spoke of what we had seen, but it lived between us like a secret too large to hide. He claimed it was just a trick of the light, nerves, imagination. I wanted to believe him, but I remembered the shape of my own face staring at me from the shadows. The rules were not cages. They were chains keeping something out, or maybe keeping us in. The town changed that winter. More arguments, more disappearances. Old Mrs. Harrow, who lived alone by the southern cliffs, vanished one morning, her door found wide open, frost creeping across the threshold. A boy named Caleb swore he saw 2 moons one night, though when he told his parents, they beat him for lying. He left town a week later, his sled dogs carrying him into the storm. We never saw him again. Fear seeped into every corner. People locked themselves inside earlier and earlier, lamps burning late into the night. The silence grew heavier, until even speaking felt dangerous. It was mid-January when the 5th rule came for me. I was chopping wood behind our cabin, the sky clear for once, the stars sharp and bright. The air was brittle, so cold it hurt to breathe. As I straightened, I glanced toward the horizon. At first I thought my eyes had blurred from the cold. The moon hung low above the bay, full and silver, its light skating across the ice. But beside it, slightly higher, was another. Dimmer, tinged faintly red, but unmistakably a second moon. My axe slipped from my hands. I stood frozen, my breath loud in the silence. I remembered the rule: if you ever see a second moon, hide until dawn. But my legs didn't move. My chest felt caged. I couldn't look away. From the tree line, shapes began to emerge. Dozens of them, maybe more. Some tall, some small, their outlines flickering as though they were half shadow, half flesh. They gathered at the edge of the clearing, standing still as statues, their faces turned up toward the sky. Then, in eerie unison, they turned toward me. The second moon burned redder, and every shape opened its mouth in silence. No sound came, yet my head filled with a ringing so sharp, I thought my skull would split. I staggered backward, stumbled into the cabin, slammed the door, and dropped the bar across it. My parents were at the table, their faces pale, their hands clutching each other. They had seen it too. My father whispered, "Hide." That was all. We doused the lamps, pulled the blankets over the windows, and crouched in the dark as the ringing grew louder. All through that night, I heard them outside, their footsteps in the snow, circling the cabin, their voices calling my name in every tone I had ever known. My mother's, my father's, Isaac's, even my own. Sometimes 2 voices at once, overlapping in impossible harmony. The second moon blood red light through the cracks in the shutters, painting the walls with shifting shapes. I pressed my hands to my ears, but it wasn't enough. The voices weren't in the air, they were inside me. I don't know how we lasted until dawn, but when the first rays of sunlight broke over the mountains, the voices stopped. I looked outside. The second moon was gone. The snow in the clearing was marked with hundreds of footprints, none leading in, none leading out. That was the night, I stopped believing the rules were just survival. They were warnings. They were boundaries keeping us sane. And now I knew what happened when the fifth one was broken. The morning after the second moon disappeared, the town was changed forever. You could feel it in the air, the way people moved faster and spoke less, the way every door stayed locked even in daylight. We gathered at the trading post, as we often did after storms or strange nights, though no one wanted to look each other in the eye. The elders stood near the stove, their hands trembling as they poured coffee, their voices hushed. Isaac found me by the barrels of salt fish, his face pale, his eyes wide like he hadn't slept at all. "You saw it too," he whispered. It wasn't a question. I nodded, and that was enough. For the first time, I realized none of us could pretend anymore. The rules weren't just words to keep children quiet. They were a fragile dam against something vast, and the cracks were showing. That day passed in silence, and the next, and the next. But the snow carried marks that shouldn't have been there. Deep strides across frozen drifts, where no man could walk without sinking. Circles burned into the ice as though from a heat no fire we knew could make. Dogs howled at nothing, then refused to leave their kennels. The forest felt closer, pressing in. At night, even with the shutters drawn, I swore I saw faces staring through the cracks. Faces like mine, but twisted, stretched wrong. I stopped writing in my journal. The words felt dangerous, like they might call something closer if I gave them shape. By February, people began to vanish. Not just wander into the snow and never return, though that happened too, but vanish in ways that defied reason. One evening, Isaac's uncle went to fetch water from the well. His wife heard the bucket hit the ice, heard his boots crunching, and then nothing. When she opened the door, the rope was swinging, the bucket frozen, and the snow was smooth and untouched all around. No footprints, no trace. The next morning, the schoolteacher disappeared from her cabin. Her lantern still burned, her coat hung by the door. Her bed was empty, but the sheets were warm. We stopped speaking of it out loud, but every loss was a wound we all carried. The town was unraveling thread by thread. My father grew quieter with each passing day. He had always been a man of few words, but now he barely spoke at all, except to remind us of the rules. "Don't go alone," he told me every time I stepped outside, even if I was just going to the woodpile. "Don't whistle. Don't answer. Don't forget." His voice carried a desperation I had never heard before, as though he knew something worse was coming. My mother lit candles at night and prayed, though I don't think to God. She whispered words I didn't understand, words her grandmother had taught her, and her hands shook as she spoke them. Then, one night, Isaac came to me again. His face was drawn, his eyes bloodshot, but his voice carried a feverish determination. "Rowan," he said, "we can't stay here. You know it. The rules aren't enough anymore. Whatever's out there, it's stronger than them now. If we don't leave, we'll end up like the others." He wanted to take the sled dogs, to follow the frozen river south until we reached the roads. I wanted to believe him, wanted to believe escape was possible. But even as he spoke, I remembered Caleb, who had left with his dogs and vanished into the storm. I remembered the second moon rising over the bay, how it had watched us, how it had known me by name. I told Isaac no. His face twisted, part anger, part despair. "Then I'll go without you," he said, and he did. I never saw him again. The next morning, his dogs returned, all of them. Their harnesses were still strapped tight, the traces dragging behind them, but they carried no sled. Their fur was wet, as if they had walked through water, though the river was frozen solid. They would not go near Isaac's cabin. When I tried, my father held me back. "He's gone," he said flatly, his eyes fixed on the tree line. "Don't look for him." I wanted to argue, to scream, but the words died in my throat. Deep down, I knew he was right. Isaac had broken the rules, the one that was never spoken aloud, but lived inside all of us. You don't leave. The forest does not let you. The days blurred after that. I don't remember sleeping. I don't remember eating. I remember the sound of voices outside the cabin at night, sometimes in the wind, sometimes just beyond the door. Always calling my name, always waiting. Once, I woke to find the latch on the window unhooked, though I knew I had fastened it tight. Frost rimmed the glass in the shape of a handprint, larger than any man's. Another night, I heard my father's voice outside, soft, insistent, raw one, "Come help me." But my father was asleep beside me, his chest rising and falling. I pressed my hands over my ears until the sound faded. It was the end of February when the second moon rose again. I had prayed I would never see it, but prayers meant nothing there. This time, it came higher, brighter, its red light staining the snow like blood. The air vibrated, the ringing starting low and growing until it was all I could hear. My father pulled me and my mother into the cellar, shutting the heavy trapdoor, bolting it tight. We huddled in the dark as the walls shook. The voices came again, dozens, maybe hundreds, all calling my name, all urging me to open the door. Some were pleading, some angry, some coaxing, some cruel. They spoke in every voice I had ever known, and some I hadn't. I felt them pressing down, trying to peel me open, trying to pull me upward into that red light. We lasted until dawn, but dawn didn't bring safety anymore. When we climbed back out, the town was silent. Cabins stood with doors wide, windows shattered. Smoke no longer rose from chimneys. No voices, no dogs, no people. Just emptiness. My father searched the nearest houses, but they were all the same. Meals half-eaten, lamps still burning, beds warm. The town was hollow, as though its life had been sucked out in one night. We were alone. For 3 days, we tried to stay. We kept the lamps lit, the doors locked, the rules sharp in our minds. But each night, the voices grew louder, closer. I began to see them in the corners of the room. Shapes flickering in the lamplight, always watching, always smiling. My father grew thinner, my mother weaker, and I knew we couldn't last. On the 4th morning, my father made the decision. "We're leaving," he said. His voice was steady, but I could see the fear in his eyes. "We'll follow the base south until we find another town. We can't stay here anymore." We packed what little we could carry: food, blankets, a rifle, my journal. My father hitched the dogs to the sled, and we left at dawn. The snow was deep, the cold biting, but the world felt strangely still. No birds, no wind, just the crunch of runners over ice. The town disappeared behind us, swallowed by the trees. I didn't look back. We traveled for hours, the sun crawling across the horizon. I began to think for a moment that maybe we could escape, that maybe the rules had limits, that whatever haunted us was bound to that cursed place. Then, as the light began to fade, I looked up. 2 moons hung above the bay, side by side, one silver, one red. My stomach dropped. The rules had followed us. Or maybe they had never belonged to the town at all. Maybe they belonged to me. The moment I saw the second moon above us, I knew there was no outrunning it. My breath caught in my chest, and the sled lurched as the dogs slowed, whining low in their throats. They saw it too. The red light poured over the snow, staining the drifts as though blood seeped through from beneath. My father shouted at the dogs, his voice sharp and urgent, but they refused to move forward. They turned in circles, yelping, tails tucked. My mother clutched my arm so tightly her nails broke the skin through my sleeve. "Rowan," she whispered, "don't look at it." But I couldn't help myself. My eyes locked on the sky, on those 2 moons staring down like watchful eyes, one familiar, one wrong. The ringing started again, faint at first, then swelling until it filled every corner of me. I thought my bones might crack beneath the pressure. My father leapt from the sled, pulling the dogs by their harnesses, dragging them forward through the snow. "Keep your head down," he shouted. His voice sounded far away, as though muffled by the ringing. I bent low, forcing my gaze to the white ground, watching my boots sink into the crusted snow with each step. The rules repeated themselves in my head like a prayer. Don't answer. Don't whistle. Don't look back. I clung to them, as if they were the only thing tethering me to this world. My mother's grip tightened, her breath ragged beside me. Together we stumbled onward, the sled dragging behind, the dogs straining against something I could not see. We walked like that for hours, or maybe only minutes. Time bent beneath the red moon. I began to see shapes moving in the snow beside us. Not footprints, but impressions. Depressions forming and vanishing as though something invisible walked alongside. Sometimes they were large, too large for any human. Sometimes they were small, like a child's, though no child would ever have walked there. My skin prickled with cold sweat, and I forced myself not to look up. I knew if I met their eyes, if they even had eyes, I would be lost. At last, we reached a narrow gorge, the frozen river cutting between steep cliffs. My father urged us into the shadows, the rock walls blocking some of the light. For the first time since the moons had risen, the ringing dulled. Though it still throbbed like a heartbeat beneath my skull, we set up a small fire in the shelter of the rocks, huddling close. The dogs lay trembling, their ears pressed flat, their eyes glassy with fear. My mother prayed again, her voice breaking, while my father kept his rifle across his knees. Though we all knew bullets meant nothing here, I drifted into a shallow, fevered sleep, though every sound snapped me awake. The crackle of the fire, the creak of the ice, the wind hissing through the gorge. Once, I thought I heard my own voice whispering from just beyond the circle of light, repeating the words of my journal. My journal, which lay zipped inside my pack. I clamped my hands over my ears and prayed for dawn. But dawn did not come. When I opened my eyes, the sky above the gorge was still dark, the two moons still hanging side by side. My stomach twisted. Had the night stretched longer, or had time itself broken? My father's face was gray with exhaustion, his eyes red-rimmed. "We can't stay," he said hoarsely. "If the sun won't come, we have to move until it does." We broke camp, though the fire had barely kept us warm. As we stepped back onto the river ice, I felt the air shift. The ringing deepened, turning into something like voices, layered and endless, speaking in languages I almost understood. I glanced up against my will, and my breath froze. Shapes clung to the cliffs above us, dozens of them, crawling like insects, their limbs bent wrong, their heads cocked at unnatural angles. They didn't move like people, but they had faces, faces I knew. Isaac, Mrs. Harrow, the schoolteacher, my neighbors. Their eyes glowed with the red light of the second moon, their mouths opening in unison. My mother screamed, yanking me forward, and we ran. The cliffs echoed with laughter. Or maybe it was the sound of rocks cracking, maybe both. The dogs bolted, the sled bouncing wildly behind, my father shouting hoarsely as he tried to steer. I stumbled through the snow, my lungs burning, my mother dragging me onward. The voices from above chased us, calling my name in every tone of familiarity, angry, pleading, loving, mocking. "Rowan," they caroused. "Rowan, come back. We're waiting. We're home." I clenched my teeth so hard my jaw ached, refusing to answer, though part of me wanted to. Part of me ached to stop running, to let them take me, to finally know what lay beyond the rules. The temptation was worse than the fear. At last, the gorge widened, spilling us out onto an open plain, where the wind howled unbroken. The sky above shimmered, the red moon swelling until it seemed larger than the world itself. My father pushed us onward, though his legs shook with every step. The dogs stumbled, foam flecking their mouths. I thought we would collapse there, swallowed by the snow, but then something strange happened. A glow appeared on the horizon, not the pale red of the wrong moon, but the faint golden blush of dawn. My heart lurched. The sun, I gasped. My mother sobbed with relief. Even my father's shoulders eased for a moment. The second moon dimmed slightly, retreating, though it did not vanish. It watched us as the first light of day spilled over the mountains. The ringing dulled, then ceased. We collapsed on the plain, exhausted, shaking, our breath steaming in the cold. The dogs lay in the snow, too tired to move. My father lifted his face to the sun, his lips moving in silent thanks. For a brief moment, I thought we had survived, that the rules had carried us through again. But then I noticed something strange. The sun was not rising higher. It hovered just above the mountains, frozen in place. The light did not strengthen. It stayed weak, pale, fragile, as though barely keeping the red moon at bay. My relief turned to dread. This was no victory. This was a stalemate. We pressed onward anyway, following the plain south. Days blurred together. The sun remained stuck on the horizon, the world trapped in perpetual half-light. We found no other towns, no hunters, no travelers. Just endless snow and the looming presence of that second moon, always trailing us, always watching. The rules still whispered in my mind, though I no longer knew if they were enough. Once while setting up camp, I heard my father humming under his breath. A tune I recognized, a tune I knew I had whistled years ago. My blood ran cold. He stopped when he saw my face, his expression blank, as though he hadn't realized he was doing it. I said nothing, but the unease coiled tighter in my chest. Nights, if they could still be called nights, grew worse. Shapes circled our camp, just beyond the firelight, their shadows stretching long across the snow. Sometimes I thought I saw Isaac among them, his smile too wide, his hand beckoning. Sometimes I heard my own voice, calling out to me from the dark, promising answers if I would just step beyond the fire. My mother grew quieter, her prayers trailing into silence. My father's eyes grew hollow, his beard wild, his movements sharp and impatient. We were unraveling, piece by piece, as though the forest's patience had finally run out. One night, when the red moon was high and the sun had dipped even lower, my mother vanished. I woke to the sound of the dogs whining, and her side of the blanket was empty, still warm. My father and I tore through the snow, calling her name despite knowing we shouldn't. We found her tracks leading away from the camp, straight into the darkness, where they ended abruptly as if she had stepped into the air. A handprint pressed into the snow beside them, impossibly large, the fingers too many, the palm too wide. My father fell to his knees, clutching the print, his shoulders shaking. I pulled him away, dragging him back to camp as the voices began again, soft and sweet, calling my name in her tone. We did not sleep that night. We did not speak. We sat beside the fire, waiting for the dawn that never came. The second moon glowed brighter, the red light bleeding across the snow, and I understood, finally, that the rules were never about survival. They were delays, thin walls against an inevitable tide. The forest, the moons, the voices, they were not trying to kill us. They were trying to claim us, and one by one they would. After my mother disappeared, my father was never the same. He had always been a man of stone. His strength, his silence, his refusal to let fear show. But something broke inside him that night. He still moved, still hunted, still drove the sled dogs forward, but his eyes were empty. He stopped speaking to me except when necessary, and when he did, his words carried a strange, hollow edge. Stay close. Keep the fire high. Don't answer. He repeated the rules like a machine wound too tight, but the urgency was gone. It was as though he no longer believed they would save us, but he couldn't let himself stop saying them. Maybe repeating the rules was the only thing tethering him to reality. We pressed on through that twilight world, the sun fixed low, the second moon burning red above. Days bled into each other, indistinguishable, but for the deepening exhaustion. The dogs weakened, their ribs showing through their fur, their breath coming ragged. We rationed what little food we had left, but it was never enough. Hunger gnawed at me until my dreams were filled with visions of feasts, tables piled high with dishes I had never even tasted in reality. I woke with my mouth watering, only to find snow caked in my teeth where I had chewed it in my sleep. My father didn't dream anymore, or if he did, he never spoke of it. It was on the 7th day after my mother vanished that I noticed something I should have seen sooner. My father's shadow had grown longer, much longer, even in the weak sunlight. It stretched out across the snow farther than mine, farther than it should have. At first I thought it was a trick of the angle, but when we stopped to rest, I saw it bend oddly, curving against the slope of the snow in ways that made no sense. My stomach tightened. I said nothing. The rules were clear: don't answer voices. Don't acknowledge what shouldn't be there. Maybe this was another version of that. Maybe even looking at it too long was dangerous. But I couldn't stop noticing. My father's shadow didn't always move when he did. That night, we built a fire in the shelter of some pines. The dogs huddled close, their eyes reflecting the glow. My father sat across from me, staring into the flames. His face was gaunt, his beard rimed with frost. The silence stretched until it felt like a weight pressing down on my chest. Then he spoke, his voice low. "Your mother broke the 4th rule." I stared at him, confused. He didn't look up from the fire. She answered. I heard her. When the voices came that night, she whispered back. Just once. Just one word. That was all it took. He clenched his hands until his knuckles cracked. I couldn't stop her. I wanted to argue, to say he couldn't know that, but the words died in my throat. Deep down, I felt the truth of it. My mother's tracks had led straight into the dark. No struggle, no hesitation. She hadn't been dragged. She had gone willingly. I remembered her prayers, the way her lips had moved in words I didn't understand. Maybe she had always been closer to the other side of the rules than we realized. I lay awake that night, listening to my father's breathing across the fire, and every time he exhaled, I swore I heard another breath join his. A second rhythm, too slow, too deep, as though something breathed with him. The days grew stranger after that. The forest no longer felt like a place we passed through. It felt alive, watching, waiting. Trees shifted positions when I wasn't looking. Paths doubled back on themselves, leading us in circles. Once, I saw a cairn of stones rise out of the snow, where there had been none the day before, a stack so precise it could not have been accidental. My father refused to stop near it. "Keep moving," he said flatly, though his eyes lingered on it longer than mine. The second moon glared above, and I began to feel its pull more strongly. At times, I would catch myself craning my neck to stare at it, my mouth opening as though to speak. I never knew what words might come out, and that terrified me more than anything. It was during one of those endless light marches that my father stumbled. He had always been steady, the one to keep us moving, but his knees buckled, and he fell into the snow, his rifle sliding from his grip. I rushed to him, panic clawing my chest. His face was pale, his lips blue, his breath shallow. "We can't stop," I said, trying to haul him up. But his body felt heavy, heavier than it should have been. He looked at me then, and for the first time, I realized how hollow his eyes were. There was no light in them. "Rowan," he whispered, and the sound of my name from his lips made me recoil. It was not his voice, Not entirely. It layered over itself, as though two people spoke at once, him and something else. My blood ran cold. He grabbed my wrist with surprising strength, his fingers digging into my flesh. "You have to keep the rules," he hissed, "even when I don't." The grip loosened. His body slumped, collapsing into the snow. I shook him, shouted at him, but he didn't move. His chest rose once, twice, then stopped. My father was gone. Or at least, the man who had been my father was gone. I sat there in the snow, the dogs whining around me, the second moon staring down, and I felt more alone than I ever had in my life. I wanted to scream, to break every rule at once and let whatever haunted us take me too. But something stopped me. Maybe it was his last words. Maybe it was the weight of the rules themselves, heavy as chains around my neck. I forced myself to bury him beneath a cairn of stones, though my hands shook with cold and grief. His shadow lingered even after the body was covered, stretching across the snow, twitching faintly as though mocking me. I didn't look at it again. That night, I stayed awake by the fire, the dogs pressed close. The voices came as they always did, circling, calling, whispering. But this time, one voice cut through them all. My father's, clear, insistent, familiar. "Rowan, help me out. The stones are heavy. Let me in." My heart clenched. I wanted so badly to believe it was him, that somehow he still lived beneath the cairn. But the rules screamed in my head, louder than my longing. "Never answer. Never." I pressed my hands to my ears and stared into the flames until the voice faded. When I finally looked up, the cairn of stones was gone. The snow was smooth, untouched, as though nothing had ever been there. My father's shadow was nowhere to be seen. After that night, I stopped thinking of the rules as guidance. They were not suggestions, not even warnings. They were bargains. They kept me alive because I obeyed them, but each obedience cost me something. My voice, my freedom, my family. Piece by piece, I was being hollowed out, reshaped to fit the silence of the forest. I knew the rules could not save me forever. They only bought time, and the second moon was patient. After my father was gone, the world grew unbearably quiet. I thought it had been silent before, when the townsfolk vanished, when the wind carried only whispers. But this was different. The silence was thick, suffocating, as though even the air had stopped moving. I traveled on with the sled dogs, though they were gaunt and trembling, their breath forming pale ghosts that lingered too long in the half-light. I felt them watching me when I wasn't looking, as though they too wondered how long before I broke the rules. Perhaps they knew better than I did that I was the last one left, and the rules had always been meant to test the last. The days, if they were still days, blurred together. The sun hung low and weak, refusing to rise higher, refusing to set. The second moon kept its post above me, glowing red like an open wound in the sky. I began to notice its pull more strongly, not just in my eyes, but in my body. Sometimes my footsteps angled toward it, without me realizing. Once, I woke to find myself standing on the edge of a frozen lake, staring at its reflection in the ice, my body trembling as though I had walked there in my sleep. The rules pounded in my skull: do not answer, do not whistle, do not stray alone. But I was alone now, wasn't I? Every step I took was alone. One night, or what I thought was night, the voices changed. They didn't just call my name anymore. They told stories. They whispered memories I had not shared with anyone. The tune I had hummed the day I broke the second rule, the words Isaac had whispered to me on the cliffs, the prayers my mother had spoken in secret. They told me they could bring them back. My father, my mother, Isaac, even the entire town. All you have to do, the voices coaxed, is answer. Just one word, Rowan warned, and the silence will end. I clenched my jaw so tightly my teeth ached. I didn't answer, but I wanted to. God, I wanted to. The dogs began to die. First one, then another, collapsing into the snow, their bodies trembling as though they had run too far, though we had barely moved. I buried them quickly, stacking stones over their bodies, but the cairns never lasted. By morning, the stones were scattered, the snow smooth, the bodies gone. By the third night of this, I stopped building cairns. I left the bodies where they fell, though they never stayed long. The last dog, the oldest, would not look at me anymore. It turned its head whenever I approached, its ribs sharp beneath its fur. One morning, I woke to find its harness lying empty in the snow, the traces trailing off into the dark where no tracks followed. I was alone. I tried to keep moving, though my strength waned. The snow grew deeper, the cold sharper, as though the land itself wanted to bury me. I scavenged what I could, but even the trees seemed stripped bare. Once I found a snare trap I had set weeks earlier. A hare dangled inside, frozen stiff. Relief surged through me, but when I reached to take it, its head turned toward me. Its eyes were human. Isaac's eyes. I dropped it, stumbling back, and when I looked again, the snare was empty. The wire hung slack, swaying gently in the windless air. I didn't set traps after that. The rules haunted me in my dreams, recited in the voices of everyone I had lost. My father's voice telling me not to whistle. My mother's whisper warning me not to answer. Isaac's laugh echoing that I should never go alone. The fifth rule hung over me like a guillotine. If you ever see a second moon, hide until dawn. But there was no dawn anymore. The sun hovered like a dying ember, and the second moon never left. The rule had failed, or perhaps it had never been meant to save me in the first place. Perhaps it was a warning of inevitability. When the second moon rises, you cannot be saved. My body weakened. My legs ached with every step. I no longer knew where I was going. South, north, in circles. It didn't matter. The land had become a maze, a trap. Paths bent back on themselves, leading me to cairns of stones I had not built. Once, I stumbled upon my own footprints, days old, circling endlessly in the snow. I knew then that I was not leaving this place. Not alive. The question was not if I would break the rules, but when. It happened on a night when the red moon pulsed brighter than ever, its glow washing the snow in a sickly crimson light. I sat by a fire I could barely keep alive, staring at the weak flames as voices pressed against me from every side. They didn't sound like voices anymore, not exactly. They were a chorus of everything I had ever known, layered and tangled until they were unbearable. I buried my face in my hands, rocking, whispering the rules over and over. Don't answer. Don't whistle. Don't answer. Don't. But then I heard it. My mother's voice, not twisted, not doubled, but clear, pure, exactly as I remembered. "Rowan," she said softly, "I'm so proud of you. You've come so far. Just say something, so I know you're still here." The dam cracked. My throat tightened, my lips parted, and before I could stop myself, I whispered back, "I'm here." The words slipped out like blood from a wound. The silence that followed was worse than the voices. For a heartbeat, nothing moved, nothing spoke. Then the snow around me shifted, as though hundreds of feet pressed down at once. Shapes emerged from the dark, circling my fire. They were wrong, impossibly wrong, but they wore faces I knew. My father, my mother, Isaac, the entire town. Their eyes glowed red, their mouths stretched wide in smiles too sharp to be human. They stepped closer, their movements jerky, puppet-like, yet perfectly in unison. "You broke the rule," they said together, their voices layered into one impossible sound. My fire guttered and died, plunging me into the red glow of the second moon. The figures closed in, reaching out with hands too long, fingers that bent in too many directions. My heart hammered. My breath tore from my chest. I stumbled back, falling into the snow, the cold burning through my clothes. Their shadows fell over me, stretching long, merging, until I was swallowed in darkness. My name echoed again and again, not as a question, not as a plea, but as a claim. Rowan, Rowan, Rowan. I don't remember how long that lasted. Maybe minutes, maybe days. When I woke, if I truly woke, the snow was gone. The sky was black, studded with stars I didn't recognize. The moons hung side by side, one silver, one red, both enormous, filling half the sky. The figures were gone, but their voices lingered in the air, whispering, humming, waiting. I was lying on bare ground, my body weak, my breath shallow. The rules circled in my mind, but they felt meaningless now. I had broken one, and yet I lived. Or at least, something of me did. Perhaps I had not survived in the way I thought survival meant. Perhaps the rules had never been meant to save me at all, but to prepare me. I sat up slowly, my joints stiff, my skin cold. My hands shook as I reached for my journal, the last piece of my old life. The pages were blank. Every word I had written was gone, erased as though they had never existed. In the margins, new words had appeared, written in a script I did not know but somehow understood. 5 rules. The same 5, repeated again and again, etched into the paper as if burned there. My hand trembled, but I turned the page. More rules, hundreds of them, thousands. Not 5, but countless. I closed the book, my chest tight, my breath shallow. I understood then. The 5 rules were only the beginning. There were more, always more, and I had inherited them. The forest had not destroyed me. It had claimed me. I was no longer a child of the town, no longer the son of my parents, no longer Rowan Keller as I had been. I was something else now, something bound to the rules, something shaped by them. I stood beneath the 2 moons, my shadow stretching across the alien ground, and I whispered the rules aloud, not as warnings, not as prayers, but as commandments. The voices echoed them back, a chorus of agreement. My voice and theirs indistinguishable. The silence was gone. The rules had won. When I first realized the rules had not only survived, but multiplied, I felt the kind of terror that strips thought down to nothing. The book I carried, the journal that had once been mine, was no longer just paper and ink. It was a living ledger, the spine pulsing faintly in my hands. The pages heavy with something more than words. The 5 rules I had grown up with had been burned away, replaced by endless commandments, some familiar, others impossible to comprehend. Never stand beneath a tree that hums. Don't step on the 7th shadow. Never drink water that reflects 2 skies. The rules stretched on without end, and I knew with a bone, deep certainty that I would never learn them all. But I didn't need to. They had already learned me. The world I stood in was not the world I had left. The snow was gone, the bay gone, the cabins, the cliffs, the forests, all of it erased. The land beneath my boots was dark, cracked, brittle as old bone. Towers of stone rose in the distance, jagged and crooked, like the teeth of some impossible creature. The sky overhead was vast, black, studded with stars that shifted when I looked too long, and always, always, the 2 moons, one pale and familiar, the other red and swollen, leaking its glow into everything. They watched me like eyes, and I understood now that they had been watching all along. I wandered through that place for what felt like days, though time meant nothing there. I did not hunger, did not thirst, though I still felt the motions of both, as though memory alone kept me tethered to the body I once had. Voices followed me, whispering from the cracks in the ground, from the shadows of the stone towers, from the very air. They no longer pleaded. They instructed. They recited the rules, each one different, each one binding. I repeated them back without thinking, my lips moving of their own accord. The rules filled my veins more thoroughly than blood ever had. At some point, I stopped feeling fear. That frightened me more than anything. Fear had been my anchor, my reminder that I was human. But in its place came something else, a sense of belonging, as though I had stepped into a role I was always meant to play. The thought sickened me, yet it warmed me too. I wondered if this was what had happened to the others. Isaac, my parents, the townsfolk. Perhaps they had not vanished. Perhaps they had been absorbed, their voices woven into the chorus that now lived inside me. I listened closely, trying to pick them out. Sometimes, I thought I heard my mother's whisper among the rules, soft and steady. Sometimes I thought I heard Isaac's laugh, sharp and reckless. But I could never be certain. They were part of something larger now, and so was I. I don't know how long I wandered before I found the others. Not townsfolk, not anyone I had known. These were strangers, but they were like me. Hollow-eyed, carrying books or scraps of parchment or carvings of stone, each inscribed with their own rules. They did not speak directly, but when they passed, their lips moved in rhythm with mine, repeating commandments in unison. I realized with a jolt that the rules were not mine alone. They were everywhere, scattered across countless lives, countless places, each one carrying its own 5 or 10 or 100. I wondered how many of us there were, drifting in this broken landscape, bound together by whispers of survival we could never fully escape. I wondered how long we had been walking, how long this had been happening. Perhaps forever. Eventually, I came upon a structure, a tower taller than any mountain, its surface carved with lines of text in languages I recognized and others I did not. The air hummed around it, vibrating in my teeth and my bones. I approached, my legs moving without my consent, my journal burning hot in my hands. The doors yawned open, vast and dark. Inside, the walls were lined with shelves, each shelf crammed with books like mine, hundreds, thousands, uncountable. Each one was alive, each one whispering, filling the chamber with a roar of rules so loud I staggered. And yet beneath the roar, I could hear them individually. Every rule, every voice. My knees buckled beneath the weight of it. Something waited at the center of that tower. I could not see it clearly. Its form shifted each time I blinked. But I knew it was the source. Or perhaps not the source, but the steward, the keeper of the rules. Its presence filled the air, immense and crushing, yet strangely patient. It did not speak in words but in knowledge, pouring itself into me without consent. I understood then what had happened to my town. We had been a test, a sliver of the larger truth. The rules are not bound to places. They are experiments, bargains, leashes cast across the world. Break them, and you are claimed. Obey them, and you are used. There is no escape, only assimilation. The figure, or force, extended something toward me. My journal flared, the pages turning on their own, stopping at a blank sheet near the middle. Words seared themselves onto the page, letters writhing like living things. A new rule, one I had never heard before. Do not tell this story. My chest constricted. My lips trembled. But I could not stop myself. I had to tell it. I had been telling it all along. And even as the ink dried, I felt the contradiction tear through me, the rule broken as it was born. The voices surged in fury, then in triumph, then in laughter. My scream joined theirs, though I don't know if it was mine anymore. I don't remember leaving the tower, but I must have. I found myself back on the cracked plain, the 2 moons glaring down. My journal lay heavy in my hands, though I no longer knew if it belonged to me. The pages turned endlessly, each one filled with rules, each one binding me tighter. I walked, and as I walked, I spoke them aloud. They poured from me like water, and I realized this was my purpose now, to carry them, to spread them, to ensure they lived on. The rules were not chains around me anymore. They were my voice, my breath, my skin. I was no longer Rowan Keller, the boy from the Alaskan town. I was the rules themselves, and through me, they would find others, and they have. You are listening now, aren't you? You have heard my story, carried it in your mind, repeated it as you read. That was all it ever took. One word, one voice, one broken rule. You think you are safe, that you are only hearing a tale from some far-off place. But the rules are patient. They seep into silence, into memory, into the cracks of thought. You will remember them, even if you try not to. Don't go into the forest alone. Don't whistle after sunset. Keep your doors locked, even if you are home. Never answer when someone calls your name from the trees. And if you ever see a second moon, hide until dawn. You will remember them, and that is enough. Because once you know the rules, they know you.